So my name is Maya, and I'm VP of Product Management at Quali. That's my third time in QA Financial Forum. Actually, the first one in New York, because I just moved here 4 weeks ago. So yeah, and I have 2 young girls, so you would imagine that one of the first things that I did was get a babysitter, right? And just so she can enjoy how lovely they are as well. And so in the past 4 weeks that I've been here, I've learned that New York babysitters don't require you to use ATMs anymore. They accept Venmo, right? And this really makes you understand how the way we handle money changes very rapidly. And you don't really need to read Accenture report saying that 35% of market share may move to non-bank players within the next 5 years, because you just see your babysitter making you do that, right? And this also explains to me why most of our clients right now are talking about that, right? We want to move to the cloud, and we want to adopt DevOps while doing that because we need to be faster. We need to release faster. Most people still do think that Agile is going to make you faster. And anyway, be able to compete with all these new challenger companies that don't have all the problems that many of us have as a bit more mature companies, right? They come into a cloud era with all the DevOps methodologies, with all the technology, no legacy, horrible culture changes to go through, and need to compete with that. You need to be faster, but you also need to kind of keep in control. And this is what is today troubling many of our clients. And the thing is that when we try to make this shift, what often happens is that there is a really, really bad regression when it comes to testing, right? Whether it is a new product, and we have this strong R&D team that tells us, well, you know what, DevOps is about moving things directly from dev to production, so I'm just going to code it here, and woo, it goes to production, and everything is good, and we don't even think about testing. Or if we're talking about an existing product, then sometimes we have a more waterfallish, I'm going to do this waterfall noun thing, waterfallish approach where we have dev, testing, staging, and then throwing away to production, wishing them luck. When we try to squeeze that into a DevOps framework, we sometimes lose a few stages in the way, or wonder, how is this possible, right? In both cases, the real question that comes to mind is, okay, where is the testing in the DevOps plan, right? This huge stakeholder of QA and testing is supposed to be there somewhere, supposed to be probably pretty dominant in this process, but that's not really how it goes, right? And the thing is that when you dive into these processes, you see that these methodologies, right, these technologies, they don't like what's complex. And a lot of the stuff that testing has to do with is complex, right? Some developers may tell you testing is dead. No need to test. We'll solve everything with the magic of fixing faster, right? And mean time to recovery is the right way to go. I really believe in that. But still, as most of us know, especially in a larger company, there is no way you can avoid regulation. And you have to think about security, and you need to think about compliance. This is not going away. You cannot just release something and then see what's going on, right? At least until they invent the big real-life undo button that I'm really waiting for that, but it's not there yet. So complex is a problem here. And one of the major reasons why this is a problem is something that actually Sven and Mark just talked about. I was very happy that they raised it because it hasn't been raised so far. And that's environment complexity. Because test automation, we know how to do that, right? Like we heard that from Credit Suisse. Yeah, we've been automating. We know how to automate. We've been doing regressions for 10 years. But the thing is that reproducing the production environment or creating something that looks like it takes a long, long time and a lot of different skill sets. and a lot of people orchestrating to work together, and it takes a long time. We run this DevOps survey. Some of you were kind enough to help us work towards next year's. But last year we got over 2,500 respondents, and I don't know if it surprises you that 26% of them told us, IT professionals, that it took the organization over a month to provision an environment for testing, also for development and for other business units. Anyone here surprised by this data? No, it's not surprising at all. And we see that with all our clients. And 59% said it took them over a week. Okay, so not surprising at all, but this is one of the top barriers for reaching continuous testing and for being able, for QA to be able to participate in DevOps. So this is a huge challenge, but I personally see that as a huge opportunity for QA and for testing to become part of this process in a new way and help lay the infrastructure to be part of DevOps. Not in the sense that I insist that QA is something that has to happen after dev and before production, but rather in taking a step back and saying, okay, I'm QA, I'm in charge of the quality, of making sure that whatever it is that gets to production is auditable, is of high quality, is secure, is addressing all the requirements, and finding out how we can make that work throughout the release pipeline, and how we can lay the automation infrastructure to make that happen throughout the pipeline. And I wanted to just look into an example of how we can use sandboxes to do this. Okay, sandboxing is something that Quali has been doing, so this is our expertise. And I would like to give you an example of how you can achieve something like that using sandboxes. So some of you may be asking, who knows what a sandbox is? Do you know what anyone knows what it's a, yeah, so I'm hearing container isolation, right? It's all true. It's about taking your environment. What is an environment? An environment is your application, it's the data, it's the third-party components that you're using, right? Salesforce, your cloud access security broker, your firewalls, I don't know, whatever it is you're using, that's part of the environment. It's your networking, it's your infrastructure. Some of it is on-prem if you're not lucky enough to have all your stuff in the cloud, right? But some of it may be in the cloud, and we could have some third-party services. We could have service virtualization because it's not ready yet and we need to virtualize some of it, right? Everything that we discussed, we need to make available for people to do their job. And when we talk about sandboxing, we're talking about taking all these individual components and putting them in some container, right? Putting them in a box. And the beauty about this, right? Automation, I've talked about this with someone today. Automation is not magic, right? It just looks like magic when you do it again and again. This is where you get the ROI. Automation is usually hard work, but you get the ROI when you run it again and again. And the whole point is to package, to containerize the environment so that you have a blueprint of the environment and you can actually ask for it again and again, making it something that you can consume as a service from the organization. And this is how you change the way that you can do continuous testing. So in our example, we're thinking, let's think about a financial organization that has an on-prem banking application and it's hosted on-prem. Sounds familiar? Familiar enough, right? So let's say this is how it looks. Okay, we have this three-tier application, presentation tier application, the database, internal employees can access it, and we of course have also our external employees, and we have the bank customers that are accessing it. And we want to test this monster. By the way, it's a really small-scale monster, right? There are worse things that you've all seen. So if we want to test this, what we could do is first create a blueprint for this application, right? And this is what you see on the left there. We'll create a blueprint that represents the application, the different tiers, the different configurations of this application, and the connection, the relationship between the different layers. And what we can then do is take this blueprint once we've packaged it, and we can start it again and again. This is where the automation magic happens, right? We're reusing it to consume this infrastructure for testing. And we can use it for functional testing and integration. We can use it for load and performance. We can use it for security. Our application is a very reusable thing because that's our business, right? We want to spin it again and again and again. It makes a lot of sense to automate consuming it. So now the next thing that happens, obviously, is that the organization wants to migrate part of the application, the presentation layer, to AWS, to the cloud, right? Now that we have our blueprint, we don't have to worry as much. Why? Because we're doing something very important, and that's separating testing from the infrastructure. When we write automated tests, they shouldn't be written so that they run against a specific infrastructure. That's not reusable. When we're using sandboxes, the automated test gets the details of the environment from the sandbox. When it gets the details from the sandbox, then it doesn't care where the sandbox resides, right? So when I want to move part of my application to the cloud, all I have to do is change the blueprint a little bit like this. Only the presentation is now deployed on AWS. That's a change in my blueprint. And now I can spin sandboxes from there, and my automated tests can still work, right? If I have some manual testing, then it can also happen in the same type of sandbox, right? So it's usable for my manual testing and also for my automation. And then, of course, we're not living in a void, right? We need to work with all the things we need to integrate with. We need to test them. So if we're integrating with Salesforce, for example, and we need to represent that in a blueprint as well, we just add that to our blueprint, right? If it makes sense to reuse it, we add it to the blueprint, and then we can spin it up again and again and create sandboxes from it. So now we have a catalog of blueprints, right, that we can consume in an automated or a manual fashion, and we can keep expanding that for different areas. And this is where you change the way you operate, from just writing automated tests and hoping that you'll have the infrastructure to run them on, to actually running them on reusable infrastructure containers. Yes? The data is part of that. Well, the blueprint is a list of instructions of how to create an environment, right? The artifacts that are being used in order to really create this sandbox, when it's relevant to create it, they don't necessarily have to reside within the blueprint. It actually, most of the time, wouldn't make sense. What would make sense is to say, hey, go to this repository, get the latest version of something, or use this synthetic database solution, or do a backup, or use some database solution and get it. The blueprint is simply, or the sandbox is simply what orchestrates all of it, so that you can go to the catalog, say, I want this for my performance testing, and the system goes, okay, I've got to go to all these repository tools, get all the artifacts that you need, do this first, then this, then this, then that, and then you've got an environment you can work on immediately, and it doesn't take you a month, it takes you 5 minutes. Right, or a minute. And then you can actually do continuous testing, because when you can consume a complex production-like environment at any point in time, it means that your CI/CD pipeline can consume it any time. And it means that your automated test that you've been working on can finally be something that could be interesting for whoever it is that works on the CI/CD pipeline, because it becomes a building block that they can actually use. And I think that it was very apparent, I don't know, we haven't discussed it a lot today. It was very, very apparent in the QA financial forums in the UK. The cultural thing, the having to have different silos work with one another. We talked about it actually a little bit today. Working with developers, right? That's the hardest part. Not caring only about the testing silo. Because I could tell you, you can automate environments and you can run manual or automated tests on them. But that's not necessarily going to make you faster. That's not going to make you stop being a bottleneck. What's going to make us not be a bottleneck is if we can actually create a building block that's interesting for everyone in the pipeline and that actually breaks silos. That means that developers, if they want to reproduce a problem or if they want to develop on something, there's no reason why they shouldn't get, unless we care about cost from some reason, they shouldn't be a reason why they can't test it on an environment that has the full network configuration if it's easy to do, right? No reason not to run security testing with every build if we can do it. The only problem today is that often it takes us 13 days to get this environment up and running. So we don't do that as part of continuous integration, right? So this is getting continuous integration and continuous testing ready.
Question.
Yes?
Just for my edification. So when you say the sandbox, that if you run the automation against, is the assumption that sandbox will be a replica of production?
Well, it's not always necessary. You know, it really depends what tests you do. And sometimes creating a replica, a real replica production environment, you know what, AWS or Azure, it also gets pretty expensive when you get pretty generous, you know, with the instances that you write. So then you have to get conscious on the price from the other hand. But theoretically, it could always be a production replica, but it doesn't always make sense. You know, it makes sense that you have a few flavors and sometimes quite a few flavors. It's always the same business logic inside. It's always pretty much the same components, but you don't always have to have Salesforce in it, right? So it could be very easy to set it up, and now it's a matter of price. How much is it to have an instance that also has an instance of Salesforce in it that costs $5 an hour, right? You need to make that math.
Do you support scenarios where there's a mainframe backend that can use vSAN?
Yeah, so specifically, you know, I didn't want to get specifically into our software. We'll be happy to talk about it. We specifically support a very large variety. We're very open in what we support. We support on-prem, we support virtual. So this is something that the answer is yes, and I will be happy to explain about. But I'm really trying to explain the, maybe, you know, the basic mechanism of sandboxing and why we think it's very important to separate your test from the environment. Right, and just to show you an example of how this looks like, just the fill, right? This is in our software where you create a blueprint, you can see all the different parts, and on the left you have a bank of your applications that you can drag and drop. So the whole point here is creating modular building blocks, okay? And it's not magic. There's code in the background. There's code in the background of everything, and everything must be source controlled. So don't get it wrong, okay? But the point is you're making a service out of it. People are supposed to be using it, humans, people that don't know how to code, right? So this is about making this a service that anyone on the pipeline can use. Yeah?
So is it like a wrapper on the top of the database which builds the configuration directly on the fly?
Yeah, so it's not a wrapper. It's actually a full framework that you can use this framework to define blueprints and then spin up sandboxes on demand with a self-service portal, and you can do it via UI or API, right? So when you ask to spin up a sandbox, and I'm assuming that you're using the UI right now, but obviously at some point it will make much more sense to do it via API, right, from the continuous integration, continuous deployment flow. Then you get this form where you put some inputs in, right? Because not all the time your requirements are the same. You need to tweak a little bit the blueprint, but it has to be human readable. And then you get a sandbox up and running, and you can run against it, right? And so this is good for manual testing if this is where you are, and you can start building your automated test, and you can start abstracting your automated tests from the infrastructure. But most importantly, it makes sense in the context of the entire DevOps lifecycle, which means what you're doing is not separate from the overall effort to be able to continuously run tests and integrate them within your CI/CD process. And that's very important for the future. Yeah.
I'm sure this is a silly question, but I'm still having a difficult time understanding the architecture. So when you say Salesforce, are you virtualizing somehow some instance, or are you just connecting some URL to an IP address and pointing to the test Salesforce region?
Yeah, so we're not virtualizing anything. We work only on your component in our case, right?
This is-
Which means that in this case, in this example, you would, for example, have the URL of Salesforce, or maybe configure a one-time instance if this is what you need for your testing, right? When we're talking about your application, it could be a bunch of things. It can be setting up an image on a virtual machine, or it could be using your configuration management tool to install the latest version, right? Really depending on how you work and how mature you are when it comes to the way that you're using servers and how your software works.
Is this being done for a particular test person, or is this being done for a department or a group of testers or developers?
This is actually, theoretically, it's for the entire organization. And what we have seen with some of our clients is that what starts with testing very, very soon gets to development as well, and also to the business users, to marketing, to training, because everybody needs the same environment. It's kind of silly that every silo has their own way of automating.
Maya, do you want to finish your presentation? Because there's a couple of people sticking their hands. Do you want to finish your presentation and then take a couple of questions?
You know, that's like the final slide, and I think
Okay.
I just wanted to summarize the benefits, but I think I've kind of reiterated them as I was answering. When you Sandbox, you can really continuously test and verify the more complex things that are not solved by the out-of-box things that come with CI, like spin up one instance, spin up one VM. That's not good enough for security, right? That's not good enough for mimicking production-like environments.
Okay. Gentleman there has a question. Would you mind waiting for the mic? Then we'll all hear.
For your presentation. So one of the issues that we have is we not only need a blueprint for our infrastructure, but we also need a blueprint for our data. In the sense that the way that our in order to maintain referential integrity, we have a snapshot of our data. So it's not only important that you can create a blueprint. The data needs to be related to each other by a metadata associated with that. Does your tool allow such a thing that not only can we create a blueprint of the infrastructure, but also the data itself, so that we can double shift left in the sense that we can change our data model also, as well as change the infrastructure also?
So data is one of the first things that come up, because that's one of the things that make it complex, right? The data, the networking, security, and data is a big thing. And as a company, we don't create the data, but it was very important for us from the beginning to allow data to be part of what's orchestrated and to be very opinionated on how it's done. So the same way that I look at application, I don't need to be the one keeping the next release of the application within the blueprint. I just need to have the knowledge of what artifact repository to get the version from. So just the same way I need to go to know where to get the data from. So we had a very nice cooperation with Delphix, for example, that's also here, to make Delphix a component within a sandbox. And that's really cool, because then you can have a database component that is actually behind the scenes a virtual database. And in the sandbox, you can say, hey, and I want something that's like production database from April. And the sandbox just spins up with the right data, with the right application, the right version. All this complexity just starts, and it's like a bubble that when you finish working with, you can tear down. It's it's not magic. There's code behind the scenes, but when it works, it's like magic, and it can really help you speed things up.
The gentleman over there in the blue shirt has a question. That row, yeah.
Hi, Giacomo from LoanVest. How does your product compare to something like Docker or Kubernetes, where you can split up containers similarly?
Okay. That's a great question, actually. Containers are a way to package applications, right? So that you can make them portable and you can move them along the pipeline. The one thing that it doesn't answer is what happens with the infrastructure, right? Your application, it's not on its own. There is a whole ecosystem of things that you need to test when you're creating an environment. So like today, even if you're using containers, you will still come to your infrastructure guys and tell them, listen, I need the latest version of the application, and I need it with Salesforce, and I need it with this data from then, and we have this service virtualization thing that we're doing with Parasoft, and you need to get that up too, or I need to get that up. And that's my environment. So it's containers and some additional things, right? So containers is definitely a technology that can be spun up in a sandbox, but it's just one of the things that you need to happen very quickly as part of your continuous testing. And
Because typically you can have that kind of third-party integration as well with the containers. You can add those links to those.
yeah, I've been with Quali for over 10 and a half years. And, in an automation company, the only thing that matters is how to be open enough to support tomorrow's technology, because they keep changing.
Okay, I think that's a good note to end on,
Yeah.
actually. I think you summed it up. Thank you very much, Maya.
Thank you.